Good morning. So I was watching a video yesterday from News Talk, who are essentially and have been generally, right, the spokesperson for all government decisions and all government policies. However, yesterday they seem to be taking shots at Simon Harris, right, and in regard to his speaking about being furious about the spending of whatever amount of money on this big scanner or printer thing, right? That couldn't even fit in the building that it was bought for, right? This is not a new issue, by the way. Like, this has been brought up over the last few years, right? But now all of a sudden it's been resuscitated and brought to the fore, and people are aghast at what went on, right? Politicians are just shocked and furious, as Simon Harris has said. But on News Talk, the presenter was saying that Simon Harris spoke of a couple of instances, right, that were under the purview of Catherine Martin at the time, my Green Party member, and he neglected to speak about the Children's Hospital or the bike shed or things like that, right, that were in his wheelhouse, right? So it's selective outrage again, right? And you now have News Talk pointing that out. So what's the difference here? I think what we're seeing here with this bringing to the surface of money wasted, public money wasted by the government, right, is you're going to see the Irish government pivot. I think that's what's going on here. They're preparing people for a pivot, right? And you know that this is what's happening when there are old stories. This scanner thing was a laughing stock a year or two ago, right? People were aware of this, that they bought this big printer thing that couldn't even fit into the building. Now all of a sudden it's been brought to the fore again, and politicians are speaking of it as if it's the first time they've heard of it, when I've known about this well over a year, right? And I'm sure many of you have too. So what's going on? I think the government, in line with what's going on in America, the Irish government are now trying to set up as if they are attacking waste, attacking fraud, even, if you will, and attacking negligence in the government, right? And they will do that by bringing up these instances of really not important things, right? 120,000 on a scanner printer thing, nonsense in and of itself. But when Simon Harris and Micheál Martin dig their heels and dig their fingers and nails into this subject while ignoring the billion a year that we're spending on housing immigrants in this country, that they won't touch that, right? That's instant waste of money. But they won't touch that, right? Because that's their decision, right? It's the whole lot of their decisions, but that's their baby, right? So they need to look like they're doing something, because they know that Irish people are watching what's happening in America, and they're going, wouldn't mind a bit of that here, right? Let's see some accountability. Let's open up the books and see where our money's going. So now they'll come up with they won't come up with them. They will magnify and highlight these instances that have already been known, right? And they'll go, see, we are tackling this, we are getting above, and we're getting on top of government waste, and we have no time for it, right? We are furious, we are. Aren't we good guys, right? And what was the other instance? There was something else as well, but it's gone out of my mind. But anyway, I think the pivot that I anticipate is a sneaky way of those that are in power now looking like they're more in line with what's going on in America, right? And they're selling themselves to the Irish public, right? And it'll be a case of, this would be a big massive story, and someone will lose, someone will be scapegoated. Could be Simon Harris. It'll be somebody though. Someone is being scapegoated, or will be. So now they can say, look, we tracked down this waste of money and we got rid of the person that was responsible for it. Everything else is grand. It was just these one or two things that we got, and we done great work there. Good, robust investigations, right? All this kind of nonsense. Aren't we great? You know, the old idea of, sure, yeah, I do steal millions off you, but sure, didn't I fix the road outside your front? This sort of nonsense, right? And Irish people love this. This is our soma, right? This is what people drink in. This is what's been sold to us for decades and decades and decades by these local councillors and by politicians in general. But I think we are about to see a pivot from this government to be more in line with what's going on in America in order to sort of assuage the Irish people and to not blow bridges to pieces too much with what's going on in America, right? They can say, look, we've a Doge department here as well, and we found the printer. But ultimately, I think what's going to happen, and I think what for each Irish person to do, is to recognise that there's a choice that is coming closer to us from the horizon, right? There's a choice on the horizon, and there's a question being asked of us, and there will be an answer demanded of us in one way or the other. And I think, excuse me, I think that question is going to be whether we align more tightly and more fairly with America, or whether we continue to be walked on a lead by the EU, right? And it's fascinating to see that people are very, very concerned about the problems or the potential blowback from Trump implementing reciprocal tariffs, right? The argument being that if Trump puts tariffs on American companies who are selling back to America, those companies will leave Ireland and go and open up in America because it's cheaper for them to do so. Therefore, pharmaceutical industry, tech industry could have 100,000 unemployed Irish people if these companies decide to leave, right? Fair enough. There will be blowback from that, but there's also opportunity that comes from that, right? Now, the real issue is not necessarily Trump's tariffs, because that would be avoidable, right? The real issue on these companies uprooting from Ireland and leaving is actually coming from the EU, right? And the IMF, right? So the IMF, in order to be a member of that, they have their articles of agreement, right? Where you need to run your economy in a way that opens it up and allows for international trade to come in, right? So that's prioritized. The globalist perspective in the economy is prioritized over nationalist sentiment in terms of economic policy. So the fact that you might want to run your nation state to benefit the Irish people in this example, to run your economy so it directly benefits them, the IMF have no interest in that, right? So they're interested in restructuring banks. They are interested in scrapping or cutting pensions in order to limit fiscal irresponsibility, right? In order for the nation to be able to pay back the loans, right? And they are also interested in compelling, strongly encouraging nation states to sell off their state assets. So Bord Gáis, Bord na Móna, that sort of thing. And Irish Water, you'll remember, right around that time, around the 2008 crash and the years following that, you had the Irish Water protests. That's what that was. Part of getting the loan from the IMF was that we would be encouraged to sell off our state assets to these private entities, international entities, right? So then now your natural resources that come from your homeland are bottled up and sold back to you as commodities, right? They're sold back to you. You now have to pay for what you've always gotten for free, relatively, right? But the issue with the American industries, Apple being a good one in America or in Ireland, is Ireland enticed these industries and companies into Ireland by offering a low tax rate. The companies could come here, work, and would benefit from having to pay minimal tax, right? But they would employ people and they would create additional businesses. Additional businesses would spawn off from their enterprise, right? So it benefits both parties. Now, what the EU doesn't allow for that. It is against the law, EU law, for a nation state, Ireland, to give what is considered preferential treatment to certain industries, right? So the fact that Ireland was allowing American companies to come in here, open up shop, and benefit from smaller taxes, lower taxes, the EU said, no, you're not allowed to do that. Unless you apply that to every single company that comes in there, you're not allowed to do that. So Ireland essentially was strong-armed into demanding or applying EU law over their national law here in regards to Apple. So that's where the Apple money came from. It was never money that Apple actually owed us. It was an agreement that Ireland had made with Apple that you'll only pay such and such tax while you're here. That was agreed on. The EU then come in, EU law supersedes national law, you'll remember. So the EU come in and say, Ireland, as part of the EU, you're not allowed to do that. We develop trade agreements as a bloc, right? And you have to adhere to our laws, which means you're not allowed to give Apple a different tax rating or a different tax percentage than some Chinese company coming in or some Dutch company coming in. You're not allowed to do that. So now you have to apply the EU law onto Apple and get back the tax that they should have paid if you were to have adopted the EU law and done what you were told. You can't be making agreements as a singular entity in your country, right? So that's what happened there. So people who are pro-EU, and they might be anti-Trump, who are saying, look, Trump is going to pull the rug out from under Irish people and all these industries and companies are going to leave Ireland and it's going to destroy the economy. It's not him doing it. It's the EU, right? So the EU are compelling and forcing Ireland to implement a more global internationalist law ahead of Ireland's own national law, right? They're not allowed to make them agreements with people anymore. So if Ireland are forced, which it looks like they are, to apply the same tax breaks or rates to all of these different companies, the American companies will just go, you know what, we're out of here. So you'll see the jobs go. And what the blame will be put on Trump, right? The blame is going to be put on Trump for tariffs and whatever. But more than likely it's not. It's because we are locked into EU membership where we are not incapable, we're not allowed. We are not allowed to make decisions that solely benefit Ireland, right? So bringing in these American companies and foreign investments and stuff like that and giving them a lower tax rate absolutely benefited Ireland. You can make arguments that it's detrimental to us as well, of course, but there's massive benefits that have come from that, right? And now because we're compelled to apply EU law to all things we do, because EU law supersedes national law, which means if Ireland comes up with a law that isn't in line with the EU, we have to get rid of it and we have to adopt the EU law instead, right? So with that being said, I think the question that's going to be posed to us, and it's worth chewing over for us now at the moment, is to really understand what it's costing us and what it's benefiting us to actually be in the EU, right? We pay more money into the EU, the EEC, whatever you want to call it, right, than we take out from it. It drains us. It drains us. Our national sovereignty is gone. We cannot make decisions based on our own interests anymore. We have to make decisions, or the decisions are made for us, and we just have to apply them, right? So all these politicians are simply managers, right? They're bureaucrats. They're not decision makers. They're just decision implementers. That's all they are. And they're vocal about it as well, right? We are totally in line with the EU. And that's why Micheál Martin can say we want nothing to do with that backward-looking idea of sovereignty, because the EU doesn't allow for that. So he's totally consistent and in line with who he's in line with, okay? So the question then for Irish people is, do you want that to continue? Because I think the EU is done. I think it's in its death throes at the moment, and I think America, it looks like they're going to make good beneficial deals with Russia, which are going to be good for both nation states. And I think Ireland should be getting in line with that as well, to be honest. I think America are a massive contributor to our economy both ways in terms of exports and imports. And I think that here's another one, right? So people, I don't know what they're thinking is around it, but we need to switch on and get more conversant with actually the nitty gritty of these things, right? Because people tend to assume that if we leave the EU, we're gone straight back. De Valera is up from the grave all of a sudden, and we're back into the 1950s where there's nothing here and everyone's leaving. Right. And that's different than today, how there's nothing here, everyone is leaving, but we're part of the EU. I thought that was supposed to make things better. right? But this country, you could argue, in many ways, is worse off than it has been in the 80s and 90s, when there was less expendable income, right? So the question is, and it's a beautiful question, a beautiful existential question, because each person, myself, yourself, and each person, they'll meet the question at different times, right? And they'll refuse it or answer the call, right? But the question is being posed to each individual and each nation state. Do you want to try and stand up on your own 2 feet and give it a go on your own and make deals, make agreements with other nation states eye to eye, right? As individual entities, instead of having your decisions made for you by some unelected group of people that have no interest in you as a distinct people. They just don't, right? They say it in their words. They don't. They've no interest in that. They don't believe in nationalism. They believe in globalism, right? They believe that everything should be interconnected in a big giant web, right? Which in theory, I don't think it's a bad thing in theory. It has to be volitional, right? And it has to be by your own choice. And you should also be allowed to retain your individual right to make decisions based on what's best for your own nation. When you're not allowed to do that, you're slowly committing suicide, because it is against the law for Ireland as it stands to make decisions economically, even politically, that are in the best interest of the Irish people. And Donald Trump would be blamed for that, when you can just as easily cast the blame on our interdependence or over-reliance on the EU, right? So that's the question for people, and I think that's the pivot that's been made. They're trying to soften it so that, in comparison to America, Ireland doesn't look so different, right? And they can claim, sure, look, we're doing the same thing here. We were doing Doge before Doge was even a thing, right? So I think that's what they're doing here. And ultimately, that'll go on in the background anyway. But the main question for people here, as an Irish person, individual, and as Irish people as a nation, is, have we had enough yet? Or do we want to actually go and try and give this a go on our own? Because we're not in the 1950s anymore. We are in where we are. We have the ability, we have the technical expertise, we have the educational know-how, right? We have solid people in nearly all industries that are perfectly capable, right? We have people going to Australia and becoming multi-millionaires based on the businesses they're creating over there. We could bring them people back. We have the infrastructure. We can expand that and make that much, much better, right? And we have the know-how. And we have the grit and determination. I think it's just there to be unlocked, right? But there is absolutely a better way out there for us. And I think if we take the risk and just separate ourselves from this EU nonsense, we don't need it. It's just sucking the lifeblood out of us. It's restricting our farmers. It's stopping them from growing, right? They're regulated nearly out of existence because these private investors that come in the back door from the IMF and EU and the way they want to run economies, right? Totally interlinked. These private investors are going to try and come in and capitalize on the fact that the governments and politicians are squeezing the life out of farmers. They'll come in then, they'll buy up the land and turn them into casinos or whatever, right? You know, hotels and refugee centres and big money that is constantly being created in Ireland by you and me and pumped into these people's pockets who don't even live here. And the EU will continue to allow that to happen, right? Because that is their modus operandi. That is the IMF's Articles of Agreement. You keep your economy open to be preyed on by much bigger people, right? People who probably have a network that is greater than the Irish economy, right? So they're just coming in stealing, and they're able to do that because of the relationships we have with the EU, the relationships we have with the IMF. I think there's a risk in terms of us scrapping that and moving past that, but I think the rewards far outweigh the risk, and there's a way of doing that. You just need to be bold about it, right?